You're sitting in front of your fan right now, and it's just pushing hot air around your face, like a hairdryer stuck on warm. You're still sweating. Here's what I found out. You can turn that very same fan, the one already humming in your living room, into something that blows genuinely cold air for $0. No new machine, no bigger electric bill. I learned this the hard way, after years of doing summer the expensive way. And almost nobody talks about it, because the secret is hiding inside a kitchen ingredient that costs less than a candy bar. Stay with me, because the piece that ties it all together comes from a trick people used 200 years ago to make ice cream in the middle of July, long before anyone had a freezer. And I promise you, it works whether you live in a big house, a tiny apartment, or a single rented room. Let me take you back to the summer of 2019. I was living in an upstairs bedroom, and by 3 in the afternoon that room hit 94 degrees. I had a box fan pointed straight at the bed, running all day, and I remember lying there, damp, staring at the ceiling, thinking, this thing is useless. That evening my electric bill notification came through on my phone, and my stomach dropped. I was paying more, and I was still miserable. That was the night I decided there had to be a better way, and there was. It just wasn't where I expected to find it. So, let me start with something that shocked me, because once you understand it, everything else clicks into place. Your fan does not cool the air, not even a little. I know that sounds crazy, because a fan feels cool. But here's the truth I had to accept. A fan only moves air. It doesn't lower the temperature of a single molecule in your room. If your room is 88 degrees, the air coming off that fan is 88 degrees. In fact, the little motor inside is working, warming up, and technically adding a tiny bit of heat back into the room. The only reason a fan feels good is because moving air helps sweat evaporate off your skin. That's it. It's tricking your body, not cooling your home. And here's the cruel part I discovered on those brutal upstairs nights. Once the air gets hot enough, and especially once it gets humid enough, your sweat can't evaporate fast enough and the fan stops helping at all. You just sit in a warm breeze feeling betrayed. I tested this myself with a cheap thermometer I clipped to a shelf. Fan on, fan off, the number never moved. 88 degrees either way. I sat there staring at that thermometer feeling like a fool, because I had spent years believing that little breeze was doing something it never did. But that discovery is exactly what opened the door. Because if the problem is that the air itself is warm, then the solution is simple. I don't need to buy a cooling machine, I just need to cool the air before the fan pushes it. And it turns out there's a way to do that with something already sitting in your kitchen cabinet. So here's where it gets good. Because the answer starts with plain ice, but ice alone is not the secret. And I'll show you exactly why. When I first heard about putting a bowl of ice in front of a fan, I rolled my eyes. It sounded like one of those silly internet tips. But I was desperate that summer, so I tried it. I filled a mixing bowl with ice cubes, set it right in front of my box fan, and waited. And you know what? It worked a little. For about 15 minutes. The air coming across that ice picked up some chill, and for a few minutes it actually felt like relief. Then the ice melted into a bowl of lukewarm water, and I was right back where I started. I remember thinking, well, that's a lot of trouble for 15 minutes. Here's what I didn't understand yet. Plain ice, sitting in a bowl, melts too fast, and only reaches 32 degrees. 32 degrees is cold, sure, but it doesn't stay cold long, and it never gets colder than that. The ice just gives up its chill in a rush and quits. I needed the ice to get colder and to last longer. And I had no idea that the answer to both problems was sitting in a blue cardboard cylinder in my pantry the whole time. Salt. Now stay with me, because this is the part that genuinely changed my summers. And it's rooted in real science that I did not believe, until I saw it with my own eyes. When you add salt to ice, something strange and wonderful happens. The salt lowers the freezing point of water. What that means in plain English is that the ice is forced to melt. But melting takes energy, and it pulls that energy, that heat, out of everything around it. So instead of sitting there at a lazy 32 degrees, a bowl of ice mixed with salt can plunge far, far colder. I'm not exaggerating this. Plain ice water sits at 32 degrees, but mix in a good amount of salt, and that icy slush can drop all the way down towards 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and in the right mix even lower, into the negatives. That's not a few degrees of difference. That's the difference between a bowl of cool water and a bowl cold enough to give you frostbite if you left your hand in it. I found this backed up by basic chemistry taught at university extension programs and in every food science class in the country. It's called freezing point depression. The salt gets in the way of the water molecules trying to freeze, so the whole mixture stays liquid at temperatures where it should be solid, and it steals heat from the surrounding air to do it. That stolen heat is the whole game, because the air your fan blows across that super chilled slush gives up its warmth to the bowl and comes out the other side actually cold. Now here is the history that gave me chills the first time I read it. This is not some new hack somebody invented on the internet last year. People have known about the salt and ice trick for centuries. Way back in the 1500s and 1600s, cooks in Italy and later across Europe discovered that packing salt around ice made it so cold they could freeze cream into a solid dessert. That is literally how ice cream was born. There were no freezers. There was no electricity. There was just ice, hauled down from the mountains or cut from frozen lakes in winter, and a handful of salt. That salt made the ice cold enough to freeze a custard solid in the middle of summer. Think about that. 200, 300 years ago, a farmer's wife could take ice and salt and get a mixture cold enough to make frozen dessert on a 90-degree day. And here we are today, sweating in front of a fan, having completely forgotten the one ingredient that makes ice do the impossible. So I understood the science and I knew the history. But knowing it and building something that actually cooled my bedroom were two different things. And my first attempt was honestly a wet, sloppy mess. Because there's a right way to do this, and I had to fail a few times to find it. So let me save you the trouble and walk you through exactly what I do now, step by step, because the details matter more than you'd think. First, I don't use a flimsy plastic bowl anymore. I use a metal bowl, or better yet, a metal pot. Metal matters, and here's why. Metal conducts cold. It pulls the chill out of the ice mixture and spreads it across the whole surface, so the air passing over it touches a much larger cold area. A plastic bowl insulates, which is the opposite of what you want. A stainless steel mixing bowl from your own kitchen works beautifully, and it costs you nothing because you already own one. Second, I fill that bowl with ice. Regular ice from your freezer is fine, but if you want it to last longer, larger chunks beat little cubes, because they melt slower. Then I add the salt. I use about half a cup of salt for a big bowl of ice, and I mix it in so the salt gets down between the cubes, not just sitting on top. Any salt works. Table salt works. But if you happen to have the coarse rock salt some folks use for ice cream makers or for melting ice on winter walkways, that works wonderfully too. And it's dirt cheap by the bag. Third, and this is the trick I stumbled onto by accident, I place a second empty bowl or a shallow pan underneath to catch nothing, and instead I actually recommend you set the whole thing on a towel because there will be condensation. That cold metal is going to sweat like a glass of iced tea in August, and you don't want a puddle on your good furniture. Fourth, I position the bowl directly in front of the fan, but slightly below the level of the fan's center, and I tilt the fan down just a touch so the moving air skims right across the surface of that icy slush. That's the part most people get wrong. They set the bowl off to the side and wonder why nothing happens. The air has to actually travel across the cold surface to pick up the chill. Angle it right, and you'll feel the difference within a minute. And here's what happens when you do it correctly. The salt drops the temperature of that slush far below freezing. The fan pushes your warm room air directly across it. The air gives up its heat to the ice. And what comes out the other side is a stream of genuinely cool air, not just moving air, cool air blowing right at you. I've measured a drop of several degrees in the airstream with my little thermometer, and on a stifling night, and a few degrees of cold air aimed right at your body is the difference between tossing and turning and actually falling asleep. But here's where I have to be honest with you. And here's where I started asking harder questions. Because when I first got this working, my next thought was, why did no one ever tell me this? I grew up thinking the only way to beat the heat was to buy something. A window unit, a central system, a fancy tower fan with 100 settings. Every summer, the stores fill up with cooling gadgets, and every one of them plugs into the wall and spins your electric meter faster. I bought a so-called portable air conditioner one year for almost $400, and it was so loud and so weak that I gave up on it by August. It's still sitting in my garage, a $400 monument to my own gullibility. And that's when it hit me. Nobody makes money when you solve your problem with a stainless steel bowl and a half cup of salt you already own. There's no product to sell you, no warranty to push, no add-on. The companies that profit from your hot, miserable summer have every reason in the world to keep you focused on the expensive machine and to let the simple old tricks quietly disappear. They don't have to lie to you. They just have to stay quiet about the cheap thing that works and let you assume comfort has to be bought. If any of this is landing the way I hope it is, if you're starting to feel like there's a whole season's worth of forgotten tricks still waiting to be uncovered, I put the full picture together in a book called Summer Smart. It's where I collected everything I tested and verified over several summers. The setups, the old techniques, the room-by-room strategies, and the history behind all of it. In one place you can keep and come back to whenever the heat rolls in. You can find it in the description below. It's the companion to everything we're talking about here, and if this video is making you rethink summer, that book will change it completely. But the ice trick, as good as it is, still depends on you having ice and running your fan. And I know some of you are sitting there thinking, that's fine, but I don't want to spend a single cent, and I don't even want to run up my fan for hours. So let me talk directly to you now. Because the neckhead part is built for the person who refuses to spend a dime and wants to work with only what's already in the house. Because here's the truth I discovered when I dug deeper. The salt itself has a second power that has nothing to do with ice, and it costs you nothing to use. The enemy on a hot day isn't just the temperature, it's the humidity. When the air is thick with moisture, your sweat can't evaporate, and that's when you feel like you're wearing a wet wool blanket. That's the exact moment a plain fan becomes useless, remember? Because the moving air can't dry your skin if the air is already soaked. Well, salt is one of the oldest moisture absorbers known to humankind. It literally pulls water out of the air. Sailors used it to keep their crackers dry on long voyages. People used to keep a bowl of salt in the cellar to fight dampness. And you can do the exact same thing today. I take a couple of shallow bowls, fill them with plain salt, and set them in the corners of the room and near the windows. Over a day or two, that salt draws moisture right out of the air. It's not magic, and it won't turn a swamp into a desert. But in a small closed room, reducing the humidity even a little makes your own sweat work again, and suddenly your fan starts helping the way it's supposed to. And it costs nothing but the salt you already have, and it uses no electricity at all. You can pour that damp salt out after a few days, dry it in a warm oven, and use it again. Our great-grandparents did exactly this, in root cellars and pantries, long before anyone sold a plug-in dehumidifier for $150. But even that isn't the free trick I want to leave you with, because there's one more no-cost move that I use on the very hottest nights, and it works with nothing but water and the fan you already own. I take an ordinary bath towel or a bedsheet, I soak it in cold water, I wring it out until it's damp but not dripping, and I hang it right in front of the open window where my fan is pulling air in. As the outside air passes through that damp cloth, the water evaporates, and evaporation is nature's own air conditioner. It pulls heat right out of the passing air. The breeze that reaches me on the other side is noticeably cooler, and it costs me exactly nothing but a wet towel. On a dry evening, this alone can knock several degrees off the incoming air. This is the same principle that kept entire civilizations alive before electricity existed. And that brings me to the thing I really want to tell you. The piece that pulled this whole puzzle together for me, and the part almost no one remembers. Because when I went looking for where all this came from, I didn't find it in a modern hardware store catalog. I found it in the deserts of ancient Persia. Over 2,000 years ago, in what is now Iran, people were living in one of the hottest, driest climates on Earth, with daytime temperatures soaring past 100 degrees, and they had no electricity, no motors, no refrigerant of any kind. And yet, they kept their homes cool, and they even stored ice through the summer. They did it with two inventions that, once I understood them, changed the way I think about my own house entirely. The first was called a badger, which translates to a wind catcher. It was a tall tower built up from the roof, open at the top, designed to catch even the faintest breeze high in the air and funnel it down into the living spaces below. And here's the genius part. As the air traveled down the shaft, they often ran it over water or through damp cellars, so it cooled by evaporation on the way down, the exact same principle as my wet towel in the window, scaled up to cool an entire home. The hot air inside, being lighter, rose and escaped, and the cool air was drawn down to replace it. No electricity. just physics and clever design. And the second invention still stuns me. They built structures called yachtels, enormous dome-shaped buildings with walls made from a special mortar. In winter, they'd bring in ice, and using shade, thick insulated walls, and evaporative cooling from that same wind catcher principle, they kept that ice frozen straight through the blazing desert summer. 2,000 years ago, in a 100-degree desert, people were keeping ice solid in July, without a single watt of power. When I read about the yachtel, I sat back in my chair and just felt foolish and amazed at the same time. Here I was, thinking I needed a $400 machine to survive an Ohio summer, and people 2,000 years ago cooled their homes and preserved ice with nothing but airflow, water, evaporation, and shade. The knowledge was there all along. We just traded it away for the convenience of plugging something into a wall. So here is how I put all of it together. And this is the finale. The thing I do on the worst nights of the year that finally lets me sleep in comfort without touching my thermostat. I take my box fan and set it in the window at night, but I point it to blow outward, pushing the hot air that built up all day out of the house. On the opposite side of the room, I crack another window, and over that opening I hang my damp, wrung-out sheet, my little homemade wind catcher. As the fan pushes hot air out one side, cooler night air gets pulled in through the wet sheet on the other, cooling by evaporation exactly the way the Persians did it. And then, in the middle of the room, right where I set my stainless steel bowl of ice and salt with a small fan skimming air across it for a direct blast of cold on my skin. Hot air out. Cool, damp air in. And a stream of genuinely chilled air aimed right where I need it. 3 ancient principles, airflow, evaporation, and the salt and ice chill that once made ice cream in the 1600s all working together. In the home I already live in, with things I already owned. My total cost, that first night, was a half cup of salt and a bowl of ice. My electric bill barely moved, and for the first time in years I slept through a July night without waking up in a sweat. That's the secret nobody sells you, because there's nothing to sell. It's older than the light bulb, older than the country I live in, and it was quietly kept alive in old cookbooks and dusty history and the memory of grandmothers who knew how to survive summer before anyone could buy their way out of it. Somebody preserved it. And now you have it too. Here's what I really want you to feel as we finish. You were never helpless in the heat. You were just never told the truth that the power to stay cool was sitting in your kitchen cabinet and your linen closet the whole time, waiting the way it waited for people for thousands of years. You strike me as the kind of person who doesn't like being sold to. The kind who trusts a little common sense over a shiny sales pitch and who'd rather solve a problem with a bowl and a towel than a bill and a warranty. That's exactly who this is for. So let me ask you something. And I really want you to answer. When you try the salt and ice bowl in front of your fan, come back and tell me how many degrees cooler that airstream feels on your skin, and tell me whether you use table salt or the coarse rock salt. Drop it in the comments right now, because I read them, and I want to know. And tell me where you're watching from, and just how hot it's getting where you are this summer. If you're the type who's done overpaying to stay comfortable, who'd rather beat the heat with a trick than a purchase, then come join the rest of us who are quietly doing summer the smart way, the way our grandparents did before the whole thing got expensive. Because next time, I'm going to show you the one spot in your house where cold air is leaking out and hot air is sneaking in all day long, completely for free, and the 10-cent fix that seals it, and once you see it, you'll never look at your windows the same way again. You made it to the very end with me, and that tells me you're serious. Here's the thing. This video showed the overview, but the full method waits inside my membership, the circle. In there, you ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be alone. You will belong here with so many others. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime, 1 click. If this little trick helped you stay cool, why not subscribe and stick around? I have many more simple, money-saving ideas just like this one, waiting right here for you.